Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I was just going through some of my pharmaceutical newsletters this morning and found out a fascinating report that I think was recently published in a magazine we've all read on a frequent basis called Pain, or Pain Magazine or something like this, that a group of scientists at the University of Arizona have found out that one of the side effects of COVID-19 may be that it reduces pain. And this has two different potential implications, probably a lot more, but one that that I guess you have less pain as you're getting infected with COVID-19, but also they think they might be able to actually make use of the learnings from what COVID-19 does to reduce pain to create a pain medicine in the future. And so therefore, I'm joined by two very smart gentlemen from the University of Arizona, Raj Khanna, who actually is a Mississauga, Toronto guy who got his degree in physiology at U of T, a PhD in physiology at U of T, is now the professor of pharmacology at the University of Arizona, and his research assistant professor, Oba Madhal, who's also at the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Arizona. Gentlemen, how are you? Welcome to my show.
Good evening. We're doing very well, thank you.
So maybe you could describe what you found and what has been published in this recent paper that you've published.
Absolutely, love to. So the paper was published in a journal called Pain, and what we essentially found was that two things, really. First, that a piece of the virus, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is causing COVID-19 across the globe, this little piece of the virus is causing, or it's giving pain relief in animals. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important in the context of being able to fool you, deceiving you, and giving you the false sense of belief that you are in no pain, you're totally fine. And so this is dangerous because if you're asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic and you have this, you may have the virus, but you don't know it. And so unwittingly, you're spreading the virus all over. So this is a pretty bad problem. The other thing, the second thing it taught us or gave clues to is the fact that it identified a new protein, which until now had never been discovered in the context of pain. So this new protein, neuropilin, is sort of a second gateway that allows the virus to come in. Most people thought that the virus is coming in through a protein called ACE2. And that's all well and good. But this second doorway, neuropilin, now is allowing the virus to come in. And we've figured out that blocking this coupling or this key and lock mechanism can stop pain. So that's really where we're trying to exploit these findings to now target this particular protein for the first time in the context of designing something for pain relief.
Fascinating. And so you've tested this in animals. Have you done anything in people as of yet?
No. We did not do anything in people. It would be very complicated with some safety issues, as you can imagine. We did test in animals the effect of the spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 virus and found that it could block a pain induced by an agent called VEGF. It's an agent from inflammation, but it can also numb pain in the context of chronic neuropathic pain. So this was done in rodents. These are proof of concept studies, but it's pretty exciting that this small part of the protein of the SARS-CoV-2 can decrease pain sensation.
But I'll add to that, Brian. So since the publication of these findings, what we've been getting are unsolicited emails from across the globe of people. In fact, I just got one about a minute ago of people reporting to us that they have had chronic pain of some sort, either be it from genetic, from an injury, or some other disease or something. And all of these people have massive amounts of chronic pain. They've been on opioids and so forth. And they happen to contract COVID. And guess what? When they contracted COVID, their pain was gone. And in some cases, once they were able to recover from COVID, the pain relief was still there. So clearly, whatever we've discovered in the laboratory context in our studies is actually bearing out in humans.
You're not not suggesting people go get COVID voluntarily just to reduce pain, are you?
No, absolutely no. No. It's a controversial thought process, but you could imagine, you could strip down a piece of the virus so that it's not replicating or anything and do that. But no, we're not suggesting it. We're just saying that there's something real that's happening. Clearly these people have pain. They got COVID and the pain's gone. So something is.
So explain why this would happen. And actually, if you believe in sort of evolution and that this virus is trying to create a genetic material that will end up, being successful, it makes sense to actually create some pain reduction, because then it'll be easier to invade a bunch of species. So I guess that sort of makes sense. Is that how it happens?
Absolutely, advantage. It's in order for it to survive, the virus needs some advantage. Viruses are amazingly adept at mutating. But why do they do that? Because it allows them to pervade across systems very easily, right? If it's a virus that kills very quickly, it's lethal. Well, the chances are it's not going to be so pervasive, right? But if it's killing you softly, so to speak, it takes longer time, and it's giving you this illusion that, hey, you're fine, don't worry, you do whatever you have to as if you were normal. That's an advantage, clearly an advantage to its spread.
We're chatting tonight with Professor Dr. Raj Khanna, a professor of pharmacology at the University of Arizona, and his research assistant professor, Obar Matel, both at the Department of Pharmacology in the University of Arizona. Interesting enough, Raj is from Mississauga and Toronto and got his PhD at the University of Toronto, so he's got a local Canadian connection. We're going to take a break for some messages and come right back with these two gentlemen in just a minute. Stay with us.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with two gentlemen from the University of Arizona, the Department of Pharmacology. The first gentleman is Dr. Professor Raj Khanna, and then his research assistant, Professor Oba Matel. Raj, let's start out with, you said you were from Mississauga. Tell me, did you grow up, whereabouts did you grow up?
I did. I grew up in Scarborough in Mississauga, and pretty much downtown. I graduated from the University of Toronto, got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in Toronto. So I lived pretty much downtown near Bay and Yonge, and I miss Toronto, great city.
And what took you to Arizona?
What took me to Arizona was a circuitous route through Los Angeles, through Indianapolis to Arizona, which is a beautiful place to live, very warm and very different from Toronto. And to really, I
understand you have a special election for senator coming up. Do you get to vote? Are you a citizen?
I am indeed. I became a citizen about a year ago, so this is my first time voting. I'm a citizen of both of Canada and the U.S., so I'm pumped to vote. Yes.
Well, we won't ask you who you're going to vote for. So, how did you come to study COVID-19 and pain?
Yeah, a great question. So, my lab has been studying chronic pain. So, what we do here basically is try to figure out what causes people to have pain, but using models in rodents. So we figure out how pain is formed and how then we can interrupt pain by designing pathways and designing drugs and compounds. So this is sort of the backstory. How do we get into studying COVID? So the lab had been investigating a series of proteins that contributed to pain for the last 10, 12 years. And about 4 or 5 months ago, in late July actually, there were a couple of reports that came across our reading, which suggested that in addition to having ACE2, which is a protein that most people know is how COVID gets in addition to having ACE2, there was another protein called neuropilin, which allowed the virus to get into our cells.
Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Last July, are you talking July 2020 or July 2019?
July 2020, actually. Pretty recent, really quickly.
So 3 months ago. Okay, good. And explain.
June.
Okay, so 4 months ago, 3 months ago. So explain what you mean by a protein getting in. So there are these proteins.
Yeah.
That are the virus COVID-19, and it gets into the body through the ACE2 inhibitor, the ACE2.
Yeah. So you can. So once the virus enters your body, it has to infect your cells, right? So your cells are these capsules. They have a membrane on which in which there are many different proteins that are from your cell. So that's your host, that's the host that is being infected by the virus. So the virus comes in, it has these particles sticking out. One of the particles from the virus is a protein called spike. It's like a little spike. This spike protein can kind of go and find some receptor on your cells, and that's how it enters. And that's where it starts the whole process of causing you problems, respiration, all kinds of myalgia, depression, all kinds of neurological manifestations. So it's entering in through a couple of receptors. And one of the biggest or most well-known receptors that spike protein from the virus uses to get in is called ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme. But that's not the only game in town. Another receptor was identified, and this is where we come in. This is how we got interested in studying this. We're not a virology lab, we're a chronic pain lab. So back to those two papers that came out in June. So those two papers showed that there was another protein in our cells that could accommodate spike and allow it to go in. And this protein is called neuropilin. So let's put this all together.
Sorry, repeat the name of this protein. Neuropilin?
Neuropilin. I can spell it for you as well. Neuropilin.
Now, I've heard of this. I thought relative to antidepressants. Does it have a role in, I've heard neuropilin uptake re-inhibitor or something like that?
No, that's serotonin.
That's a norepinephrine. Norepinephrine. That's different.
Okay, different.
Right. So this is, go ahead. So neuropilin, so back to the story then. So spike protein binds to this newly identified receptor and comes in. And we already knew from our studies that there may be a link between what we were studying and neuropilin in the context of pain, right? We hadn't published that. We knew that. So now we ask the question, look, could spike of the virus, of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, could it have something to do with pain? And that's really our motivation. It was further sort of developed when we thought, well, how do we reconcile this in terms of clinical implication? Well, the most parsimonious explanation was, why are people spreading this so much? Well, if you're asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, perhaps the reason you're spreading it so much is because you don't know it. You're feeling no pain. If you're not feeling pain, you're not going to go to see a physician. So you're walking around feeling no pain that the virus has given you.
So even worse than not having symptoms, you're actually feeling even better because you're feeling no pain.
Right. You're asymptomatic, but you had the virus on board. But the virus is what its role right now is not to cause you the disease. Right now, its role is to
spread it.
Spread, exactly. So in order to answer that question, and
actually sounds like a brilliant adaptation for the virus.
Pretty cool, right?
Absolutely. Brilliant adaptation. Evolution at its finest, probably. So if we put those two things together, we thought, okay, what if we can figure out how
No wonder President Trump says he's never felt better in 20 years.
That's a loaded question, that comment. I'm not going to answer that one. But we try to connect these two very disparate findings. And that's really where we got into studying COVID in the context of pain. And so I'll tell you a couple of cool series of experiments that really hit the nail on the head and really defined to us that we were on the right track. So before I do that, I'm going to ask you, if you feel pain, I can ask you, are you in pain, right? So that's a pretty easy notion that if people can articulate their pain, but animals cannot. So we have to have some sort of surrogate assays or proxies for measuring pain. In an animal, we can simply probe the animal's paw with either heat, and at certain point it's going to feel it's too hot, it's going to withdraw its paw. And another way is tactile stimulation. So a hair-like filament, you probe the paw, and with increasing strength, the animal at some point will find it annoying and it'll move its paw. So those perceptions of annoying or pain are essentially proxies of pain. So what we did was we took normal animals, naive, normal, uninjured animals, and gave them a signal, a molecule that recruited neuropilin. The neuropilin is how spike is coming in. Remember? So we basically gave these naive animals a signal to get the pain signaling started, and these animals had pain, which was manifest by them withdrawing their paw quicker to a heat and also quicker to a tactile strength. Now, when we had these animals in pain, we now gave them a little piece of the virus, the spike protein, a little piece of that. And would you like to guess what happens? The animals had no pain for about 9 hours of the course of the study. So in these naive animals, we could induce pain and block it with spike protein. So that was the first piece of evidence. Now, as I said to you earlier, we work on chronic pain. So we also have models of animals where the animal suffers from long-term pain. And so we made a cohort of these animals. And in these animals that have long-term chronic pain, which means that they're able to, even with a small, delicate touch, they will withdraw their paw very quickly. In these animals, we gave them, again, spike protein, little piece of spike virus protein. And again, as with the naive animals, these animals, their pain was completely reversed. So these two pieces of information gave us conclusive evidence that spike protein was causing analgesia or some sort of pain relief. And that's when all things just went, hey, eureka moment, and we got super excited and started going right into it.
Okay, so what are the implications of this? Number one, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do animals get the COVID virus? You're giving the COVID-19 virus to animals. Do they get COVID-19?
No. In short, no. To have a proper infection of the animals, they need to be transgenic. That means that we can change their ACE2 receptor to the human sequence of the ACE2 receptor, and then we can infect them with COVID-19. But just normal, regular animals that we find every day in labs or outdoors, and I'm talking about rodents only, they cannot get COVID-19.
Okay, and so what you've done is you've taken transgenic rodents and subjected them to COVID-19 or to the spike protein from COVID-19, and you found that it has analgesic impacts.
Our animals are not transgenics; they are just wild-type animals. We did not need them to be infected by the virus because we only wanted to look at the action of spike on neuropilin-1.
Okay, so they haven't got the virus. So what did you give them? Part of the virus, just the spike protein for the virus? How do you do that?
Yes, proteins in laboratories, we can purify these proteins and modify them any way we like. So we just got only the extracellular domain, so the little domain of the spike protein that points out of the virus, and that's the only thing we use. We use only a very small part of the virus.
So the proteins can be grown much like, yeast or bacteria for beer. You grow vats of these things, and you can purify from these bacteria pieces of whatever you put them in them. And so from this, the little piece, innocuous piece, for example, if you stab yourself, nothing will happen. An innocuous piece of the virus can be made, replicated, and we got that, and that's what we injected into the animals.
So you've created this spike portion, a spike protein portion of the virus, and that's what you've injected into the animal. And what you're saying is the spike protein portion of the virus has no virus in it?
Yes.
Correct, yes.
The virus is defined by spike, but also other proteins, the core proteins, the RNA polymerase that it has, and you have the whole capsid with some lipids in it. So it's a lot of biological molecules that come together to make a functional virus. We're using very, very small part of the virus for our studies.
Just sort of a sideline, will a vaccine include this spike protein in it?
Definitely.
Yes.
So are you suggesting that maybe the vaccine will reduce pain?
It should, theoretically, it should give you more than pain relief. It will prevent the virus from even attacking you, right? So
if it's got some of the spike protein in it, not only will it give you a vaccination against the virus attacking you, it'll reduce your pain.
Let's not go too far. The vaccine will maybe contain a little bit of the spike protein. That doesn't mean that it will contain the part of the spike that we are working on. And the vaccine, the basis of the vaccine is that you give just a little bit of the antigen, and then your immune system is going to do the rest of the job. The goal of the vaccine is to develop antibodies against this part, and the part that is more likely to be used is the portion of spike that binds to ACE2, and not the portion of spike that binds to neuropilin. That this one is very far apart from the domain that binds to ACE2. So the vaccine will do its job into blocking the virus. We cannot conclude too much about blocking the pain.
But that's pretty clever, right? But that's clever, right? Because now the virus can bind to ACE2 to do its business to get infected. But on the other side, it's also binding neuropilin to give you the pain relief. So it's kind of juxtaposing its own protective, it's protecting itself by allowing you pain relief, but at the same time also using this other route to make you sick. So maybe this one comes up earlier and then ACE2 becomes more prominent and so you get more and more sick. But initially, it's allowing you to infect people.
The other thing to think about is probably what we're seeing is relevant to the very early stage of the infection in people, because that's when you have the virus roam free in the body. And within 7 to 10 to 12 days, that's when you have the natural immune response of people. And then that portion of spike can be attacked by antibodies, and then it's not relieving pain anymore. But we cannot know for sure about this angle of the infection. We would have to do a lot more research for that.
We're chatting tonight with Professor Dr. Raj Khanna, University of Arizona, Department of Pharmacology, and his research assistant professor, Oba Matel. Stay with us. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with these gentlemen in just a minute. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I come to you every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. I get to interview some really fascinating people, and tonight is no exception. I've connected up with Dr. Professor Raj Khanna of the Department of Pharmacology, the University of Arizona. Interesting enough, even though he's in Arizona, he comes to us from originally Toronto, Mississauga, and Scarborough, where he grew up, and he went to U of T for an undergraduate, to a master's and a PhD, and he's joined by his research assistant professor, Obar Matel. Obar, we've heard Raj's background. Where are you from, sir?
Oh, I'm from France. I'm from Lyon in France. That's why I did my bachelor's, master's, PhD. And after completing my PhD, I came to Arizona to work with Raj.
So, I've been to Lyon, great wine and great food. Why would you want to leave Lyon and come to Arizona?
There was very cool science going on in Arizona, so it was worth the move. I do miss the food and the wine.
Well, it's a pleasure to have both you gentlemen with us tonight. So we've talked about how this COVID-19 virus has a spike protein on it, and you're saying that it couples with two different receptors in the human cells. I can't pronounce them. One is ACE and the other one is neuro something or other. And the ACE is a way of getting in and making you sick. And you think that it also binds with this other one that reduces pain. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what are the implications of this? What are you going to do next? You've published this paper. You've got a bunch of news. You got published in a summary paper that I read every morning, and I found you. What do you do next after just publishing the paper?
So what was really cool with that study is that beyond the fact that the spike protein from the SARS-CoV-2 could numb pain, it highlights a new signaling pathway that is important for pain. Pain that is related to inflammation or maybe injury, but also chronic neuropathic pain. So now we have a new pathway and a new target to act on chronic neuropathic pain. So now we're going to try to attack this new site and develop maybe new therapeutics for chronic neuropathic pain.
So I think there's a couple other things that we should think about this from what the virus is teaching us. First, the virus is teaching us that all of the negative side effects are there, but there's something clever that the virus is doing, which is providing pain relief. And it's clever because it's allowing the virus to succeed in being able to be sneaky and really spread far and wide. So that's something that perhaps other viruses in the future may also have, and we need to be careful with that. And that's why having, simple things like a mask and social distancing really ought to be working and be practiced here. The other big thing that I take from it, and which we would use and really learn from and go forward, is prior to the surprise emergence of COVID in December of 2019 in Wuhan, the US in particular, and parts of Canada as well, but mostly the US has been suffering from an opioid epidemic. And really, you have sort of a collision of two big events here. You have the pandemic, a global event, and you have an epidemic, an opioid epidemic, which has been made worse by the fact that people are not able to go to their physicians. Pain management has been really severely hampered, and chronic pain patients are suffering. So this has actually gotten worse. The opioid epidemic is actually worsened, not gotten better. So our findings have implications for both of these massive events. The fact that we can identify, or the virus has unveiled to us, a new protein, neuropilin, which now we can target for neuropathic pain and develop drugs for neuropathic pain, that's massive for us. And I think we could study neuropilin for the next 20, 30 years and really go and figure out whether this is a new way, a new target, which may result in a new therapeutic.
Okay, and the second is what? You said that there's two implications. The first implication is that you find out this therapeutic. What about opioid? How does it affect or potentially diminish the opioid impact?
Well, it will. It may diminish the opioid impact because the whole focus of our lab's works are really to design and test out non-opioid based compounds, which eventually will make it to clinical stage.
So you're coming up with a pain reducer that is not as addictive or as lethal as opioids. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Exactly that. We're coming up with ways to develop drugs that are non-addictive, non-liable. They don't have all the side effects that opioids have. So maybe this protein, neuropilin, could be one of those proteins that once we develop something, maybe that's going to be non-opioid based.
Okay, so let's take a step back and talk about pain for a second. So when you think about pain, opioids, morphine, tramadol, things like that, give me an array of the different things and how you would describe what they are and how they deal with pain.
Pain is a pretty complicated phenomenon. It involves not just the physical element of pain, but the affective component. So that's why it's so difficult. It involves multiple brain regions, multiple parts of the body, the spinal cord. So that's why it's been hard to design the magic elixir or the magic bullet for pain, right? So there are a bunch of drugs that are available for acute pain. You have, for your aches and pains, cuts and bruises. There's good medicines for that.
So what? Aspirins and Tylenols and
right. And then so beyond that, for pain. So chronic pain really is something that has changed the system irrevocably. It's just changed it in a way that the system is now going to be not the same anymore. And even though your injury has resolved, the pain is still there. So that's chronic pain. So how do you solve that? There are some medications. Opioids have been used for thousands of years. There are medicines that are used for, particularly for surgical, acute pain, but really for long-term pain, they have no use, or their use is not recommended. And so opioids really have garnered a lot of attention because of the fact that they've been misused in chronic pain cases. And what that does is that the more you use, the more you need to use, because you become tolerant to pain. You become tolerant to these opioids. So, the more you use, you have these unbelievable side effects, constipation, and really the big one, the killer, is breathing. You respiratory depression. So you can't breathe. You can't breathe. You're not going to live. So opioids really have been in sort of the gold standard for pain, for short-term acute pain, but for long-term, they have no benefit. For long-term, really, there's a handful of options. You have these things called gabapentin, Lyrica, which are calcium channel targeting drugs. What are some of the other variants? Amitriptyline, duloxetine,
and then pre-out, but pre-out's only for extreme cases.
So it's a very few number of drugs that are available. There are surgical options. There are options where you could have steroids, for example. At the University of Arizona, researchers here that are physician scientists, including our labs, have discovered use of green light therapy. So let that sink in. You know, for somebody who lived in Toronto in the winter months, there's not a lot of light, and you know there's seasonal affective disorder. So if you take that idea further, light in itself has a very strong power to be healing. Well, green light, if you dissect out the various parts of light and use the green wavelength light, we showed a few years ago that green light was pain relieving. And now that has borne out in people with fibromyalgia, people with migraine. If you simply expose yourself to green light for an hour at an arm's length in your field of view, these people are seeing significant pain relief. Their opiate consumption is decreasing. And so there are many ways to treat pain, but none of them satisfying. And really, the non-pharmacological treatment has not been, adopted by a lot of people yet. So there's opioids on the one hand, which are causing a lot of problems, and then a smattering of drugs that are not really super effective. So that's always giving us, there's something missing. We need to know more in order to figure out how to design better drugs for chronic pain.
Okay, and so therefore what you are going to do in this lab is you're going to take the spike protein portion of the virus, and you're going to try to dissect the portion that attacks this one part of the cell, this one receptor on the cell, and turn it into a pharmaceutical product?
Yeah, we're actually already doing that. So this receptor on the cell, neuropilin, its structure is already known. So the proteins are in three-dimensional structure. So there's a piece of it that's already been known structurally. So why is that important? Well, you can see it. You can figure out exactly where the spike protein is binding. And if you can find that out, you know exactly where the lock is going, where the key is going into the lock. And so if you change a few things on the lock, well, the key needs to adapt itself as well to accommodate itself, to fit in there. So what we've done basically, instead of spike fitting in, we've taken away spike and we've modeled in compounds that occupy that lock or that position on the protein. And we've already found compounds, small molecules that fit into that groove on the receptor where normally spike would have come in. And these compounds are being tested in our lab for their ability to block viral entry, obviously for one thing, but more importantly to see if they can stop pain signaling. And we have some evidence already that that's happening. And in due time, it will take a few years, this could translate into humans where something that we develop, a compound that we develop that blocks this protein on the surface, could be useful for pain relief.
Unbelievable. Fascinating. And so what are the implications of this for COVID-19?
Well, it's hard to say because even though we're developing these compounds, it's going to be a very long process to get them into clinical trials. So hopefully the COVID-19 pandemic would be done by then. And we're more hopeful to use these future small molecules for treating pain.
But I think one thing we could say, I would agree with that, but one thing we could say is that COVID is teaching us to be careful with the virus, especially in the early stages of the virus. So maybe another virus that comes in, like SARS, like I was in Toronto when SARS first broke in 2003, I think. And so how is that different from this virus, SARS-CoV-2? So maybe some of these viruses have common features which we need to be careful of the next time this happens. So let's say SARS-CoV-3 or some other virus comes up in 2025. We should, knowing what we know now, perhaps we can be more aggressive in some of the distancing or some of the mitigation strategies early on, and be very careful and mindful of the potential spread that's coming from asymptomatic people. So these are some of the things that COVID itself is teaching us. We may not be able to cure or solve or attack or mitigate COVID now, but maybe lessons learned today could be useful in the future.
But isn't it even more? Because, you know, when I think about if I was Tony Fauci and I read your paper, what I'd be doing is going on TV and I would be saying, not only does COVID-19, when it infects you, not show up symptomatically right away, and so therefore you're asymptomatic as you're walking around and potentially spreading it, it may in fact actually make you feel less painful. And so be very careful. What it does is it makes the comments that they've made so far in regards to the risk associated with asymptomatic people continuing to walk around and infect other people even sort of more extreme. It's like, you know, I've got to, not only do I not have an outward display of the sickness, but I've got a mask on that's fooling me that I'm feeling better than I actually would because I got no pain anymore.
Absolutely. I don't know if our studies will get to Dr. Fauci. He's pretty busy, but absolutely, I would agree. I mean, think of the caution that this could add, the disclaimer that this could add. It's enormous, right? I mean, it really could stem any further propagation, and really could make people more scared, actually, more aware of what they need to do to really stop this. I would agree with you, yeah.
Fascinating. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. We've been chatting with Dr. And Professor Raj Khanna, the professor of pharmacology at the University of Arizona, and his research assistant professor, Oba Matel. Gentlemen, I ask you to come back and tell us more in the future as you go through the development. And I really appreciate you making us aware of this, because I do think that what this does is it compounds the problem associated with COVID-19 not being symptomatic right away, because it means that it's not symptomatic right away. It's asymptomatic, and it's less painful. It's reducing pain. If we otherwise had pain, it reduces the pain. So, you know, you think about, and I know you don't want to make the political comment, but you think about Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, saying that he feels better than he did 20 years ago. Number one, that could be the drugs that he's taking. Number two, it could be the steroids that he's taking. You know, I've had friends on steroids, and they are manic for a while, and then they crash a couple days later. And then number three, it could be the virus itself, which has reduced pain. So, you know, my gosh, what a fascinating finding that you gentlemen have just published. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for your time. Go Leafs, go.
Thanks very much. Good night.
Good night.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. You know, I've had the pleasure of interviewing numerous different people about COVID-19. Today's interview with Dr. Raj Khanna talking about how COVID-19 may actually reduce pain, and that researching this COVID-19 spike protein might be a way of understanding how to reduce pain is absolutely fascinating. I've had the real honor of interviewing some really smart people over the course of the last couple of months in regards to COVID-19. Undoubtedly, a lot of you have listened to a lot of different interviews as well. But I've had the pleasure of interviewing some infectious disease doctors, some other physicians about the infection, about regular infections and how they can grow exponentially over time. I've had the opportunity to interview people working on vaccines. Bruno Hossoff, the CEO of Oxford University Hospital System, 10,000 people, 40 units, 4 hospitals, working on the vaccine, working on antibody validation trials, working on testing validation trials. Fascinating description. I've spoken to people that are working on testing, whether it be DNA testing or handheld testing or remote testing that you can take home, or fast testing. And I've spoken to a whole bunch of different companies that are dealing with PPE CAME, whether it be the Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, or Irwin Toys. And I guess I've come away with a couple of conclusions from these conversations. Number one, I think resilience is key in companies and hospitals and governments. And we not often enough think about resilience. We not often enough do those questions that Alex Vesna, the CEO of Prepared Canada, who I've interviewed several times, talks about the what if, thinking about those black swan white swan event opportunities that we don't think about often enough, and how we can prepare for them. So resilience is key, and we need to build in more resilience into our companies, into our personal lives, into our governments, into our public health system. I think number two would be that the companies, the governments, the places, the people that have been able to pivot to a new future. I spent some time talking to Chris Overholt over Active Media, who's talking about the growth of esports. Well, that's someone that's pivoted, and the growth of esports, the growth of Zoom, the growth of online communication, it's all gone crazy. And people have taken advantage of the needs and satisfied needs during this COVID-19. And so therefore, I think the people that have been able to pivot and come up with new business strategies have been the most successful. I think the people that have seen this as just something to hunker down and wait through, versus those that have seen it as an opportunity to not necessarily exploit, but to move forward, really have shown a difference in business strategy. And I'm convinced that those that have turned a crisis into opportunity, which is the old Chinese saying, are the ones that have been most successful. And lots of companies that have done that, whether it be the restaurants that have really expanded their patios and takeout rather than just closed down, or the delivery services, or all the online businesses. I think all of those have been more successful than people that have just sort of battened down the hatches and waited out the storm. And then I think that people have talked about, and I think this is really true, that really what we have done is we've accelerated 5 years of digital growth, digital transformation of our economy in 5 months. And so these people that have seen COVID-19 really as a crucible, as an acceleration of a whole bunch of other trends that were taking place, I think that's true. And so I think that those, again, that have been able to see that, exploit that, adapt to it, have been the most successful. And then I guess I think my final lesson after all my interviews would be, and I'm not sure exactly how you implement this, and I'm not in government, though I'd love to be, but I don't know exactly how you do it, but I am convinced that we haven't taken tough enough action quickly enough such that we could open up more quickly. And, you take a look at South Korea, you take a look at Taiwan, you take a look at Hong Kong, you take a look at Singapore. They actually took far harsher, more restrictive action, New Zealand, Australia, than we did. But then they opened up more quickly. And, it's sort of this, we've got this sort of halfway that we took some actions, but we didn't close down completely. And what they did is number one, they protected their vulnerable. Number two, what they did is they isolated the people that were infected. Number three, they restricted everyone else dramatically. And then they were able to open up. And because we wanted to open up, we didn't take actions maybe as stringently as we otherwise wanted to or would have. And we ended up sort of not doing either well. And so I really wonder whether what we should have done and what we still need to do is close things down, get everyone wearing masks, get everyone social distancing for a certain amount of time, get this thing completely behind us, and then completely reopen. And I worry that we've done sort of, maybe half or three-quarter measures. But again, I don't know. It's just a perception that I have. Diane Francis, I did an interview with, spoke about how we needed to do exactly this, that we needed to be far more stringent in our restrictions, but then far more quickly open up so we didn't have the economic problems, the mental health problems, the isolation problems that we've incurred. So I think that, there's a lot that we've learned. Resilience, adaptability, pivoting, not seeing this as something you had needed to manage through, just batten down the hatches. No, that was the wrong decision. Try to figure out how you make money, how you realize people's needs. And then I think finally that sometimes you got to be tougher, such that in the medium term you can be less tough. Anyway, just a couple of thoughts. That's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or you can get me streamed online at saga960am.ca, or you can get all my webcasts, podcast, video casts after the fact on my website, briancrombie.com. Thanks for joining me. Good night.